sat alone in his cabin and watched the snow fall on a moon where snow should not exist. The heating unit hummed in the corner. A bottle of synthetic whiskey stood half empty on the table. An old vinyl record played earth jazz from 200 years ago, the trumpet notes floating through the small room like ghosts. He was 73 years old. His left arm was made of metal and wire, a field replacement from a war he tried very hard to forget. His face carried scars that no surgery could fix, not because the technology did not exist, but because he did not want them fixed. The scars reminded him. They kept him honest. Tonight was New Year's Eve in the year 2847. Somewhere across the galaxy, humans gathered in bright cities to celebrate. They drank and laughed and kissed and made promises they would not keep. Had done those things once. He had been young once. He had believed in things. Now he believed only in silence. The cabin sat at the edge of the barrens on the frontier moon of IV. He had chosen this place carefully. Nothing lived here. The soil was poison. The air was thin. The nearest human settlement was 300 kilometers away, and they knew better than to visit the old man in the wasteland. Poured another drink and lifted it toward the window. "Happy New Year," he said to no one. "Another year of nothing, just the way I like it." He had been a medic in the galactic conflict. Combat medic first class, they called him. The soldiers had another name, the Butcher's Mercy. He had saved thousands of lives across 40 years of service. He had pulled broken bodies from burning ships. He had restarted hearts with electricity and stubbornness. He had held dying soldiers and lied to them, telling them they would be fine, telling them their families were waiting, telling them anything that would give them peace in those final moments. And he remembered every single one he could not save. The war had taken everything from him. His wife died in the first wave of attacks. His friends fell one by one across decades of fighting. And his daughter, his beautiful Sarah with her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn spirit, died in the orbital bombardment of Earth Colony 7. He had been there. He had held her hand. He had watched the light leave her eyes and known that all his skill, all his training, all his desperate human refusal to accept death meant nothing. That was the day he stopped being a medic. He had burned his insignia. He had disabled his emergency beacon. He had told the Veterans Administration that he wanted to die alone and forgotten, and they had respected his wishes because they understood. They had seen the look in his eyes. They knew that some wounds could not heal. The record finished playing. The cabin fell silent except for the wind outside and the hum of the heating unit. Closed his eyes and let the whiskey warm his chest. He was almost asleep when the shadow fell. It came without warning. One moment the twin moons of IV shone through his window. The next moment they were gone, blocked by something massive, something that moved through the thin atmosphere with impossible grace. Opened his eyes. His old soldier instincts woke up, screaming warnings through his tired body. He reached for the pistol he kept under his chair, a habit from decades of war that he had never broken. The ground shook as something landed outside. The impact was heavy enough to crack the frozen soil, heavy enough to make his bottles rattle on their shelves, heavy enough to tell him that whatever had arrived was very, very large. Then his door began to glow. It started at the edges. The metal frame turned orange, then yellow, then white. The heat washed through the cabin like a wave, stumbled backward, raising his metal arm to shield his face. The door did not explode or break. It simply melted, running down like water, pooling on the floor in a glowing puddle. And standing in the ruined doorway was a creature from humanity's oldest nightmares. 20 meters of scales and muscle and barely contained fire. Wings folded against a body built for war. Eyes that burned like twin suns, ancient and terrible and proud. Claws that could tear through starship armor. A mouth that opened to reveal teeth the size of swords, and a throat that glowed with plasma waiting to be released. Had fought during the Third Expansion War. He had treated soldiers burned by their fire. He had watched entire battalions reduced to ash. The war had ended in a bloody stalemate, both sides too exhausted to continue, but the hatred remained. They did not enter human space. Humans did not enter territory. This was the law. This was the peace. And now one of them stood in his doorway, and all could think was that his quiet death had finally arrived. But then he looked closer. He saw something he did not expect. There was shaking. Not with rage, not with battle fury. She, and somehow knew it was a she, was shaking with something else entirely. Her massive body curled inward, protective, desperate. Her burning eyes held not hatred but fear. And clutched in her, held against her chest with terrible gentleness, was a bundle wrapped in scales. The bundle moved. It made a small, weak sound. It collapsed at his feet. The floor cracked under her weight. Her head bowed low, lower than any had ever bowed before a human. When she spoke, her voice came through a crude translation matrix, mechanical and broken but understandable. You are the one they call Death's Denial, the human who pulled soldiers from the void with bare hands, who restarted hearts with lightning and spite. Did not move, he did not lower his pistol. That was a long time ago. That man is dead. My clutched daughter is dying. This voice cracked with something that sounded horribly like a sob. Your kind knows diseases, mine does not. Your weapons created the sickness that kills her now. Please. She held out the bundle. The scales parted, revealing what lay inside. A hatchling, no bigger than a house cat. Her scales were dull and flacking. Her tiny wings hung limp. Her breath came in wet, rattling gasps, and even in the cold night air could see the fever burning through her small body. The hatchling opened her eyes. They were golden, slitted, and filled with innocent trust. The man who had sworn never to practice medicine again felt something crack open in his chest, something he had buried with his daughter 20 years ago. The hatchling looked at him the same way Sarah had looked at him in those final moments, like he could fix anything, like he could save her. And he knew with terrible certainty that his quiet new year was over. The cold wind howled through the melted doorway, stood frozen, his pistol still raised, his mind racing through 40 years of training and 20 years of trying to forget that training. The mother remained on her knees. In all the histories, in all the war records, no human had ever seen a kneel. They were creatures of pride and fire. They bowed to nothing, feared nothing, asked nothing from lesser species. Yet here was one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, trembling at the feet of an old man in a ruined cabin. Get up, said. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, rough from disuse. Your kind does not kneel. My kind does not beg, the replied. Her translation matrix made her voice flat, but the desperation underneath was clear. My kind does not come to humans for help, but my daughter is dying and I have tried everything else. Finally lowered his pistol. He set it on the table with a heavy clunk. I am not a medic anymore. I cannot help you. You are the only one who can. Find another doctor. There are hospitals, medical stations, specialists who actually practice medicine. His eyes flared brighter. Do you think I have not tried? I flew across half the galaxy. I broke 17 treaties just entering your space. I visited your stations in secret, stole data from your medical archives, consulted every healer my people possess. None of them understand what kills my daughter, but I found your name in the old war records. I found what you did during the siege of Station. I found the counteragent you developed. Felt his blood run cold. How do you know about that? I know everything about you. I know you helped create the cure for the bioweapon your people used against mine. I know you saved prisoners when your commanders ordered them left to die. I know you are the reason my brother survived the war. She reached into the bundle and gently lifted the hatchling. The small creature whimpered, her eyes half closed, her breathing shallow and wet. Even from across the room could see the signs: fluid in the lungs, fever burning through the tiny body, scales losing their color as the immune system failed. He knew this disease. He had seen it before in prisoners during the war. It was a bioweapon designed by human scientists to target the respiratory system. The war had ended before it could be deployed on a large scale, but samples had escaped into the galaxy. Sometimes they found new hosts, sometimes they mutated, and sometimes they killed children who had nothing to do with the war at all. Even if I wanted to help, said slowly, I do not have the equipment. I do not have the supplies. This cabin has nothing but whiskey and old memories. I will get you what you need. Tell me and I will find it. It is not that simple. The treatment requires materials that do not exist on this moon. It requires knowledge of physiology that I barely remember. It requires, he stopped, shaking his head. It requires me to be someone I am not anymore. The mother rose to her full height. Even kneeling, she had been massive. Standing, she filled the ruined doorway, blocking out the moons and the stars. Her shadow fell over like a death sentence. Let me tell you what will happen if my daughter dies, she said. Her voice was calm now, terrifyingly calm. I will burn this moon to ash. I will destroy every human settlement I can find. I will reignite the war that killed billions, and I will not stop until your entire species is dust. Met her burning eyes. You would start another war over one child. Would you not? The question hit him like a physical blow. He thought of Sarah. He thought of holding her hand in that hospital room, watching the machines beep and whir, knowing that nothing he could do would save her. He thought of the rage that had consumed him afterward, the blind fury at a universe that could take something so precious, the desperate need to make someone, anyone, pay for his loss. Yes, he would have burned worlds for her. He would have ended civilizations. He would have done anything. I understand, the said softly. You know what it is to lose a child. You carry that grief like a second skin. I see it in your eyes, human. The same darkness that waits in mine if my daughter dies tonight. Looked at the hatchling. She had stopped whimpering. Her eyes were fully closed now, her breathing even more shallow than before. She was fatting, slipping away with each passing moment. 20 years ago, he had made a choice. He had chosen silence. He had chosen isolation. He had chosen to let the part of himself that cared about anything die with his daughter. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. What is her name? He asked. The eyes flickered with surprise. She has not earned a name yet. Among my people, hatchlings receive names only after their first year. She is simply my daughter. Then I will call her Small One for now. Walked toward his storage closet, his metal arm whirring softly. I need you to do exactly what I say. No questions, no arguments. Can you do that? Yes. First, I need heat. Your fire, can you control it precisely? I was a forge keeper before I was a mother. I can melt a single grain of sand without touching the grains beside it. Good, we will need to sterilize everything. This cabin is not clean enough for surgery. He pulled out a dusty box and began sorting through old equipment. Second, I need to contact some people, old friends who owe me favors. They will send supplies, but it will take time. How much time? Looked at the hatchling again. Her chest rose and fell in tiny, struggling movements. More time than she has, probably, but we will try anyway. Why? The question seemed to escape the before she could stop it. Why help us? We are your enemies. We killed your soldiers. We burned your worlds. Found what he was looking for. An old communications unit, military grade, hidden beneath spare parts and forgotten memories. He blew the dust off its surface. Because I am a doctor, he said quietly. And doctors do not choose their patients based on what species they are or what wars they fought. They choose based on who needs help. He activated the communications unit. Static hissed, then cleared. This is Combat Medic First Class, retired. I need emergency medical supplies dropped to my location within 6 hours. Anyone who receives this message and owes me their life, now is the time to pay that debt. The mother watched him with something new in her eyes, not just desperation anymore, something that might have been hope. "You called yourself retired," she said. Looked at his metal hand, at the scars on his face, at the empty bottles and the silent cabin and the life he had built around forgetting. "I was wrong," he said. "Apparently, retirement does not agree with me." The first drop pod crashed into the frozen soil 3 hours after sent his message. It came from Station, 2 light-years away, carrying synthetic plasma and surgical tools wrapped in emergency packaging. The note inside was short. "From Sergeant, you pulled my guts back inside my body figured I owed you." The second pod arrived 20 minutes later, nanosurgical equipment from a retired nurse on the asteroid belt. She had included antibiotics, pain medication, and a bottle of real Earth whiskey with a message that said, "For after, you'll need it." By the time midnight passed and the new year officially began, 7 pods had landed around's cabin. Supplies from veterans scattered across the frontier. People he had saved. People who remembered. The 8th pod came from Fleet Admiral, his former commanding officer. Inside was a case of coffee beans, actual coffee, not synthetic, and a note that read, "Knew you couldn't stay retired, you stubborn bastard. Give them hell." Worked through the night. The mother, who finally told him her name used her fire to sterilize the cabin. She heated the air until it shimmered, killing every bacteria and virus that might contaminate the surgery. Then she cooled it with careful breaths, creating a clean environment that would make any hospital jealous. "Your control is impressive," said as he prepared his tools. "I was the best forge keeper in my clan before the war, before my mate died in a battle with your ships." Her eyes darkened. "Before I learned to hate humans. And now." She looked at him, at this small, fragile creature who moved with such purpose, whose hands never shook even as he prepared to cut open her daughter. "Now I am not sure what I feel." The hatchling lay on the table had converted into an operating surface. Her breathing had grown worse. The fluid in her lungs was building faster than her body could clear it. Without intervention, she would drown in her own fluids within hours. Connected monitors to her small body, adapting human equipment to alien physiology through guesswork and memory. The pathogen showed up immediately on his scans, a mutated version of the bioweapon, changed just enough to attack young but recognizable in its basic structure. "I know you," he muttered to the disease. "I remember you." Watched from the corner, her massive body coiled tight with anxiety. "Can you cure it?" "Maybe. The original counteragent should still work, but her body is different from adult. Smaller, more fragile. I need to modify the treatment." "How long will that take?" "I do not know. Hours, days, time I do not have." He began anyway. The work was brutal and precise. He opened the hatchling's chest with tools designed for human bodies, adapting his techniques on the fly. Anatomy was similar enough to work with but different enough to keep him guessing. Their hearts were larger, their lungs had extra chambers, their blood ran hotter than any human's. Every cut was a risk, every decision was a gamble. Could not watch, but she could not look away either. She had never seen anything like this. A creature with no scales, no fire, no claws, fighting death with nothing but knowledge and steady hands. "Why do humans do this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Did not look up from his work. "Do what?" "Survive, fight, refuse to die. You have no natural weapons. Your bodies are soft and breakable. How did you live long enough to reach the stars?" Laughed, a short and bitter sound. "Because the universe kept trying to kill us, and we took it personally." He worked for hours. The hatchling's vital signs dropped, stabilized, dropped again. Pumped her full of modified counteragents, hoping her young body would accept what he was giving it. He drained fluid from her lungs, cleared infections, stimulated her immune system with compounds he had mixed from memory and desperation. At one point her heart stopped. roared, a sound of pure anguish that shook the walls of the cabin. Fire erupted from her throat before she could control it, scorching the ceiling. "She is gone," she wailed. "My daughter is gone." But was already moving. He grabbed a defibrillator, a human device that he had modified using parts from his coffee maker, because he had not had time to wait for proper equipment, and pressed it to the hatchling's tiny chest. "Not yet," he said. "Not while I'm still standing." He shocked her once, nothing. Twice, nothing. 3 times, and was screaming for him to stop, to let her go, to end the torture. But did not stop. He never stopped. This was what humans did. They refused to accept the unacceptable. They fought death not because they could win, but because surrendering was not in their nature. "Come on, small one," he whispered. "Come back. You have not seen the oceans yet. You have not flown through clouds. You have not lived. Come back and live." On the 4th shock, the hatchling's heart stuttered. On the 5th, it began to beat again. Collapsed against the wall, her massive body shaking with sobs she had probably never allowed herself before. Among her people, tears were weakness. Among her people, grief was private. But understood, he had cried the same tears 20 years ago. The hatchling's eyes opened. They were cloudy, confused, but alive. She looked at this strange creature who smelled of exhaustion and determination, and she made a small sound. Not a whimper this time, something closer to a purr. "She needs rest," said, his voice hoarse. "The counteragent is working, but her body has to do the rest. The next 24 hours will be critical." "Will she survive?" "I do not know, maybe, probably." He finally allowed himself to sit down, his legs shaking from hours of standing. "The treatment should work, but she is young. Young bodies are unpredictable." Moved closer, her head bowing until she was eye level with him. "You brought her back from death. You refused to let her go. That is what doctors do. That is what humans do." She studied him with new eyes, seeing something beyond the scars and the metal arm and the tired old man. "My people believe that strength is everything, that the strong survive and the weak perish. But you are not strong. You are small and soft and breakable, yet you fight harder than any warrior I have ever known." Looked at the sleeping hatchling, at her chest rising and falling with each precious breath. Strength is not about size or power. It is about refusing to give up, even when giving up would be easier. Dawn broke outside the ruined cabin. The first light of the new year crept through the windows, painting everything in shades of gold. "Happy New Year," said quietly. "Apparently it is going to be an interesting one." 3 days passed. The hatchling grew stronger with each hour, her scales regaining their bright colors, her breathing clear and steady. She followed everywhere, her tiny wings flapping uselessly as she tried to keep up with his slow human steps. Watched this with a mixture of joy and concern. "She has bonded with you," she said on the 3rd morning. Looked up from the medical equipment he was cleaning. Bonded. "Among my people, hatchlings form connections with those who care for them during their recovery. Usually it is clan healers, sometimes parents, but she did not see me when she woke from her fever. She saw you." The hatchling had climbed onto his lap and fallen asleep there, her small body curled tight against his chest. He had not moved her. He told himself it was because he did not want to disturb her rest, but the truth was simpler and more painful. She reminded him of holding Sarah when she was small, before the war took everything. "What does the bond mean?" he asked. "It means she considers you family, a secondary parent in human terms." Eyes held something complicated. "Among my people, such bonds are sacred. They cannot be broken." "I am a human, she is. Your people will not accept this." "My people will have to accept many things after today." She moved closer, her massive head lowering until she could look at him directly. "You have changed everything. For 20 years, my clan has taught our children that humans are vermin, weak creatures who won the war through tricks and numbers. But I watched you fight death with nothing but knowledge and refusal. I watched you bring my daughter back when all hope was lost. I was just doing my job. No, you were doing much more than that. You were showing me that everything I believed was wrong. Did not know how to respond. He had spent so long hating himself, hating what he had done and what he had failed to do, that the idea of being anything good seemed absurd. He was just an old man who could not let go of the past. But maybe, just maybe, the past could be rewritten. The hatchling stirred in his lap, opening her golden eyes. She looked at and made that small purring sound again, the one that meant she felt safe. Then she spoke. Grandpa. The word was broken, barely recognizable, filtered through a throat designed for fire rather than speech. But understood. He had heard that word before, in dozens of languages across dozens of worlds. Grandfather. His eyes burned with tears he had not allowed himself for 20 years. He looked at, whose own eyes were suspiciously bright. She has never spoken before, whispered. Her first word, it is you. Before could respond, the cabin's warning system screamed to life. Red lights flashed. Alarms blared. Something was entering IV's atmosphere, coming in fast and hot. Grabbed the hatchling and moved toward the window. In the sky above, he could see the distinctive shapes of human warships dropping through the clouds. 3 cruisers, their weapons arrays already glowing with charged energy. They found us, said. Her voice had changed, becoming hard and cold. The mother was gone. The warrior had returned. Your people have come. They are responding to your entry into human space. Treaty violation. His mind raced. They will demand your surrender. I will not surrender. I will not leave my daughter. Then they will kill you, and the war starts again. Spread her wings, filling the cabin with shadows. Fire gathered in her throat, ready to be released. Then let it start. I have lived as a warrior. I can die as one. And your daughter, what happens to her? The fire dimmed. Looked at the hatchling in his arms, at the small creature who had just learned to speak his name. The warrior faded, and the mother returned. I do not know, she admitted. I have never been good at thinking beyond the next battle. The lead cruiser descended toward the cabin. Its external speakers crackled to life, and a familiar voice echoed across the frozen landscape. This is Fleet Commander. We have detected an unregistered vessel in restricted space. Surrender the hostile entity immediately, or we will be forced to take action. Remembered her as a young soldier, barely 18, pulled from the rubble of Colony 7. He had saved her life. She had called him uncle for years afterward, until the war ended and they went their separate ways. Now she commanded warships, and she was asking him to betray the creature who had trusted him. Stepped outside, the hatchling still in his arms. The cold wind bit at his face. The cruiser's weapons tracked him, ready to fire at any movement. He called out, his voice carrying across the distance. Stand down. There is no threat here. You are harboring an enemy combatant. She violated 17 treaties just entering our space. I have orders to. She is a mother. She came to save her child. That is not an act of war. The cruiser hovered in silence. On the bridge, Nu was struggling with the same conflict he had faced 3 days ago. Orders versus conscience. Duty versus humanity. Emerged from the cabin, her massive form casting long shadows across the snow. The cruiser's weapons immediately locked onto her, their humming growing louder. One wrong move, his voice warned, and we will fire. Stood tall, her wings folded, her fire contained. She looked at the warships with eyes that had seen 100 battles, and she made a choice that no had ever made before. She bowed her head. I am of the Flame Keeper's clan, she said, her voice carrying through the thin air. I entered your space without permission. I broke your laws. I would do it again 1,000 times to save my daughter, but I am tired of war. I am tired of hatred. If my death will bring peace, then take it. Only spare my daughter and the human who saved her. The cruiser did not fire. Raised his voice again. I am transmitting my medical logs to you now. Everything that happened here, everything I did. Send it to the Galactic Council. Send it to everyone. Let them see what is possible when enemies choose to help each other instead of fight." A long moment passed. Then's voice returned, softer now. "What are you trying to do?" He looked at the hatchling in his arms, at the dragon mother who had trusted him with her child's life, at the warships that represented everything he had once believed in. "I am trying to build something new," he said. "Something better. Will you help me?" The cruiser's weapons powered down. The humming stopped, and in the cold morning light, the first fragile threads of peace began to weave themselves together. 1 week after the night that changed everything, stood outside his rebuilt cabin and watched the sky fill with ships. They came from everywhere. Human medical frigates carrying supplies and volunteers, transport vessels bringing healers who wanted to learn human techniques, neutral observers from a dozen other species, all wanting to witness what many called impossible. The Galactic Council had convened an emergency session 3 days after transmitted his medical logs. Representatives from every major civilization had gathered to discuss the implications. For the first time in living memory, stood before the assembly and spoke not of territory or vengeance, but of gratitude. Had told them everything. The desperate flight across the galaxy, the old human hermit who had refused to help at first, then refused to stop helping when death came calling, the treatment that should not have worked but did anyway, the small acts of kindness that had shattered her understanding of humanity. "For generations, we taught our children that humans were weak," she had said, "that they survived only through numbers and deception. But I watched a single human fight death with nothing but knowledge and stubbornness. I watched him bring my daughter back to life through sheer refusal to accept failure. This is not weakness. This is a strength we never understood." The speech had spread across the galaxy. Billions watched. Billions listened. And slowly, carefully, the hatred that had defined relations between human and for centuries began to crack. Had been offered every honor humanity could give, medals for bravery, a position on the Galactic Medical Council, even immortality through neural upload, his consciousness preserved forever in crystal matrices. He refused all of it. "I do not want to be remembered," he told the officials who came with their offers and their cameras. "I just want to be useful." Instead, he requested permission to establish something new, a neutral medical station on the border between human and space, a place where species could come not to fight, but to heal, a living memorial to the possibility of peace. The council approved unanimously. Now, watching the ships descend through the atmosphere of IV, felt something he had not felt in 20 years. Hope stood beside him, her massive form casting a shadow that should have felt threatening but instead felt protective. Her daughter, she had been named, which meant gift of unexpected fire in the tongue, sat on shoulder, her tiny claws gripping his shirt, her golden eyes watching the ships with wonder. "So many," said quietly. "I did not expect so many." "Neither did I." "Are you afraid?" Considered the question. A week ago, he had wanted nothing but silence and solitude. A week ago, he had believed his life was over. Now he stood at the center of something that could reshape the galaxy. "Terrified," he admitted, "but that never stopped me before." A shuttle broke away from the formation and landed nearby. Its doors opened, and a stream of figures emerged, humans in medical uniforms, healers in their ceremonial robes, researchers and students and volunteers from worlds had never visited. A young healer approached, barely larger than would be in a few years. She walked with the uncertainty of youth, her eyes wide with nervous energy. "You are the human called Death's Denial?" she asked. "I am just. The stories say you fight death out of spite, that you refuse to let it win because losing makes you angry." Smiled the first genuine smile he had worn in years. "The stories exaggerate. We do not fight death out of spite. We fight it out of love. The spite is just how we express it." The young healer tilted her head, processing this. Then she bowed, the formal gesture of a student to a teacher. "I wish to learn from you. Will you teach me?" Looked at her, at the ships filling the sky, at the impossible gathering of former enemies choosing to work together. He thought about Sarah, about how much she would have loved to see this moment, about how proud she would have been of the choices he had made. "Yes," he said, "I will teach you, I will teach all of you." The days that followed blurred together in a rush of activity and chaos. The cabin that had been his hermitage became the first building of what would eventually grow into medical center. Humans and worked side by side, rebuilding and expanding, learning each other's techniques and traditions. There were arguments. There were moments when old hatreds flared and tempers exploded. More than once, had to step between former enemies and remind them why they were here. "We did not come to forget the war," he told them during one particularly heated conflict. "We came to build something better than war. That is harder than fighting, but it is also more important." Slowly, grudgingly, the peace held. On the anniversary of that first New Year's Eve, stood on the observation deck of the completed medical station. Below him, ships from 50 species docked and departed. Patients arrived from across the galaxy, seeking treatment that only this place could provide. Former enemies sat together in cafeterias, sharing meals and stories and the slow process of understanding. Now a full year old and growing larger every day, curled around his feet. She had learned to speak both and human languages, and she used them interchangeably, switching between the two as easily as breathing. "Grandfather," she said, using the word that had become her favorite, "why do you look sad?" Reached down and stroked her scales, marveling at how natural the gesture had become. "I am not sad, small one. I am thinking about someone I lost a long time ago. The daughter whose picture you keep by your bed." He nodded. Sarah's photograph still sat on his nightstand, the only possession he had brought from his old life. Her name was Sarah. She would have been about your age in a way. "Was she a healer like you?" "She wanted to be. She had the hands for it, steady and gentle." His voice caught, but he forced himself to continue. "She did not get the chance." Pressed her warm body against his legs. "I think she would be happy now. You saved me. You are saving many others. The universe is better because you did not give up." From the mouths of hatchlings, thought, wisdom that had taken him 70 years to learn. The stars shone through the observation deck windows, cold and distant and indifferent. But the station was warm and bright and full of life, full of purpose. Had spent 20 years trying to die. He had isolated himself, buried his skills, refused to care about anything or anyone. He had believed his story was over, that he had nothing left to give. But the universe had sent a dragon mother and her dying child to his doorstep, and everything had changed. He looked at the creature who called him grandfather, at the impossible bond that had formed between them. He thought about all the lives he would save from this station, all the enemies who would become allies, all the peace that would be built one patient at a time. "You know what the best thing about humans is?" he asked. "What?" "We never know when to quit." He smiled and lifted his eyes to the stars. "And sometimes that makes all the difference." The new year had begun, and for the first time in 20 years was looking forward to seeing what came next.